A marriage can survive many things, but a lie whispered in the shadows is deadlier than a bullet fired in anger. The candlelight flickered violently, caught in a sudden draft as the door swung open, sending a cold rush through the lavishly decorated seaside dining room. Outside, storm clouds churned on the horizon, lightning threading silently through the distant sky, a warning sign ignored for too long. She stood frozen at the table, watching helplessly as he entered, holding the hand of a woman whose smile was both victorious and cruel. The air thickened instantly, laced with betrayal and the scent of expensive perfume. Their eyes met, husband and wife, across the widening abyss of broken vows, and in that silent instant, she knew this night would not end in peace. Helen Morris leaned back in the leather booth, gaze drifting toward the flickering candle set at the center of the table. The Golden Coast restaurant was a place she and her husband, Charles Charlie Vasquez, had frequented for years. Perched high above the Pacific shoreline, it offered sweeping ocean views through floor-to-ceiling windows. Helen remembered how, long ago, Charlie had knelt right there on the veranda, proposing to her during a soft violin rendition of La Vie en Rose. At the time, she thought it was the most romantic moment of her life. Now, everything about the place felt charged with tension. She could practically feel the molecules of the air vibrating with dread. She smoothed a hand over her navy blue silk dress, her special occasion outfit that she wore on date nights or anniversaries. But this night, Charlie had insisted on bringing his new assistant, Sabrina, to discuss something important. Helen had turned 53 just a week earlier, although her friends insisted she did not look it. Tall and lean from years of early morning swims, she carried herself with the composure of someone who had spent decades navigating the complex waters of high-stakes divorce cases, first as a junior associate, then as a seasoned trial lawyer. Alongside her late father, Arthur Morris, she had built a small nest egg, which ultimately funded the purchase of a spectacular beachside property. Arthur, in his final days, made her promise never let anyone take that house from you. It's your sanctuary. Helen, a place I wish I could have given you under different circumstances. That line echoed in her mind as she observed the uneasy expression on Charlie's face. In contrast to Helen's quiet poise, Charlie wore his usual confident grin, although the edges appeared tight. He was 5 years older than she was 58 and in robust shape, thanks to a personal trainer. A successful venture capitalist, he thrived on risk and big payoffs. For the past few months, Helen had noticed a subtle change in him, an eagerness to stay late at work, a flash of guilt whenever she asked how his day went. She had her suspicions, but she never imagined he would be brazen enough to bring those suspicions to life in the form of Sabrina, someone 25 years younger, sporting a professional-looking pencil skirt and a forced, polite smile. Helen studied Sabrina discreetly, noting her restless hands that kept smoothing down the front of her blouse, her eyes darting around the restaurant as if bracing for impact. Though Helen was known for her unwavering calm, an undercurrent of dread now pulsed through her veins. Something about Charlie's stony silence, the way he kept touching Sabrina's arm, the way Sabrina's cheeks flushed whenever they made eye contact, signaled that this was about more than business. Just then, a waiter approached with a bottle of vintage red wine, courtesy of Charlie's instructions. Helen allowed him to pour. Letting the silence hang, she felt each passing second magnify the tension until Charlie finally cleared his throat. "Helen," he said, voice tight, "Sabrina and I have something to tell you." A cold wave of certainty washed over Helen. She exhaled slowly, steeling herself for what was to come. Charlie launched directly into the announcement, as if he were presenting a new investment pitch. "Helen," he began, "Sabrina is pregnant. Well, we wanted you to hear it from us first." The words cut through Helen's chest like a scalpel, precise and numbingly painful. She watched Sabrina place a trembling hand on her abdomen, a gesture that might have been meant to project maternal warmth, but instead felt more like a subtle demonstration of power. Helen found herself momentarily stunned into silence. Despite her months of suspicions, hearing Charlie declare his mistress's pregnancy in a public restaurant still jarred her. Sabrina's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and a muted triumph. She spoke with a voice that tried to convey sincerity, but wavered with nerves. "I'm sorry you have to find out this way," she said, not sounding apologetic at all. "It's just, Charlie and I feel it's time to start a family." Helen noticed the younger woman's carefully manicured nails, the faint lines of tension around her eyes. She wondered if Sabrina expected a meltdown, a slap, or a screaming match. For a moment, Helen could only focus on the ambient sounds of the restaurant murmured conversations, clinking silverware, waves crashing distantly below. Her father's cautionary words flitted through her mind. It's not just about trusting your spouse, it's about never sacrificing your dignity. She inhaled slowly, determined to hold on to that dignity no matter how horrifying the announcement might be. Then came the second blow. Just as she dreaded, "We want the house," Charlie said, almost in the same breath. He leaned forward, hands clasped on the white tablecloth. "You know, the beach property your father left you a stake in. It's big enough for a child, a real family home." Sabrina nodded, as though she already pictured herself raising a newborn in Helen's living room, painting over the very walls Helen had lovingly chosen the color for. The audacity nearly left Helen breathless. That house was her father's final gift, a place purchased with an inheritance set aside to honor her freedom. In the early years of her marriage, she had made sure the deed and corporate structure were meticulously arranged, not entirely under the simplistic umbrella of joint property. She might have put Charlie's name on a few forms, but never as full owner. The memory of Arthur's last words flickered like a warning light. "Make sure you never let them corner you." "Helen." Her silence seemed to stoke Charlie's arrogance. He continued, "Look, you have your law practice, plenty of income. Why not be fair about it? Sabrina and I can't raise a family in the small condo we've been using. It's time we do what's right for our future." He slid a set of documents across the table, a proposed asset division that allocated the beach house squarely to him and, implicitly, to Sabrina. Helen lifted her gaze from the papers to meet Charlie's eyes. She felt no tears, only a steely resolve taking form inside her. Her right hand twitched slightly. Sabrina watched her warily, perhaps expecting an emotional outburst. Instead, Helen calmly reached for her glass of wine, took a measured sip, and spoke in a low, controlled voice. "You two have made a terrible mistake." Helen's words hung in the air like distant thunder. Slowly, she set the wineglass down, letting the swirl of dark red liquid settle. She noticed the subtle smirk tugging at the corners of Sabrina's mouth. It was the smirk of someone who believed they had the upper hand, as though the entire marriage was just a business transaction waiting to be nullified. Charlie exhaled, clearly anticipating an explosion from Helen, but she refused to grant him that satisfaction. Instead, she leaned forward and lowered her voice. "Give me one good reason," she said softly, "why you think you can dictate the fate of a home that was never yours to begin with." A flicker of confusion passed over Charlie's features. He tried to maintain his arrogant facade, but Helen could see uncertainty creeping in. Sabrina, emboldened by the tension, placed her perfectly manicured hand over Charlie's. "We're prepared for a legal resolution," she stated, her tone bridging the line between honeyed politeness and condescension. "A family court judge will see that the property is part of the marital estate, especially given your joint accounts and the way Charlie contributed to the household expenses. Isn't that right, honey? She glanced at Charlie, who nodded a little too quickly. All we want is fairness. Helen's mind flashed through a mental inventory of how she had structured her inheritance. She'd had a conversation years ago with her father about setting up a trust that protected the beach house from exactly this scenario. At the time, Charlie shrugged it off as just a formality, as if he considered her father's cautiousness an old man's paranoia. Now, seeing the smugness on Sabrina's face, Helen realized she had her father's foresight to thank for this fleeting sense of security. She slowly rose from the table. Even in her high heels, she felt as though she was levitating, propelled by sheer determination. The people at adjacent tables cast curious glances, aware that something dramatic was unfolding. Without warning, Helen reached out and, in one swift motion, slapped Charlie across the face. The crack echoed. Sabrina let out a small gasp. Charlie's hand flew to his cheek, eyes blazing. Helen wasn't proud of resorting to physical contact, but it was as if the pent-up frustration demanded release. She had to show them that if they came at her like thieves in the night, she would not stand idly by. That, she said quietly, is for disrespecting me in public. You want to wage a legal war? Do it, but don't expect me to just hand over my father's legacy. She turned, and as she did, she knocked her wine glass so it tipped, spilling deep red liquid across the tablecloth and onto Sabrina's lap. Sabrina jumped up, letting out a shrill exclamation. A hush fell over surrounding diners, and someone at the next table gasped. But Helen didn't care. She walked away, every step a statement of defiance, heart pounding, adrenaline surging as she thought, they have no idea what they've just set in motion. Helen left the restaurant without looking back, stepping into the crisp ocean air. She paused near the valet stand, taking a moment to steady her breathing. The ocean's roar was a strange comfort. She remembered her father once telling her how, if you listen closely enough, the steady crash of the waves can remind you that the world is bigger than any single betrayal. In that moment, she needed every ounce of that reminder. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She rummaged for it, half expecting a text from Charlie, or perhaps a friend who'd already heard gossip from inside the restaurant. Instead, the caller ID displayed Marcus Reeves. Helen felt a surge of relief. Marcus was not only her law firm's security consultant, but also a close friend he had served in the military before pivoting into private investigations and security. If she was about to go to war legally, she needed a strong ally at her side. She answered, voice still taut with tension. Marcus, got a minute, he asked. His deep baritone rumbled over the line, immediately grounding her in a sense of safety. More than a minute, she said, walking away from the main entrance and over to a quieter corner by a low stone wall overlooking the cliff. I think you might have guessed by now, but Charlie has made his move. On the other end of the line, she could practically hear Marcus nodding. I had a feeling something was coming. You said he'd been distant, making odd financial moves. Are you okay? Helen exhaled. He just told me no, informed me that his secretary, Sabrina, is pregnant, and they want the beach house. She tried to keep her voice steady, but a tremor leaked out, a mix of indignation and hurt. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's bold. What are you planning? Helen peered into the darkness, watching moonlight dance on the ocean's surface. First, I want to confirm every piece of documentation about the house, the trust, the inheritance, all of it. Then I want to show Charlie and Sabrina that they're gambling against someone who knows more about divorce law than they ever will. Marcus didn't hesitate. Tell me what you need. I can pull financial data, track possible infidelities, gather evidence that might strengthen your position. Helen felt a surge of gratitude. Yes, I'll need all of that. Tonight was just the opening salvo, but they've declared war. I want to be sure I'm the one who finishes it. She paused, letting the ocean breeze fill the silence. Then, in a quieter tone, she added, "And there's one more thing I slapped Charlie. In public, I worry that might come back to haunt me." Marcus chuckled softly, though not unkindly. "We'll handle that if it becomes a legal matter. Just be careful. I'll come by your place tomorrow to discuss the details." Helen thanked him and ended the call, feeling marginally steadier. Clutching her phone, she looked back toward the restaurant one last time. She imagined Sabrina flustered, cleaning wine off her clothes, while Charlie grappled with the sting of her palm. It wasn't enough to erase the betrayal, but it gave her a glimmer of satisfaction. Tomorrow, she thought, the real fight begins. The next morning, Helen awakened in the master bedroom of her father's beach house, her beach house. She reminded herself fiercely, late the previous night, she'd driven the winding coastal road to this sanctuary rather than returning to the modern high-rise condo she'd once shared with Charlie. She wanted to be closer to the memory of Arthur Morris, to the solidity of the structure that he had helped her purchase. At dawn, she padded barefoot through the house, flipping on lights and drawing back curtains. The ocean view was spectacular, a wide stretch of golden sand below, gulls wheeling through the sky, the horizon punctuated by sunlight dancing on gentle waves. Arthur had selected this place after a painstaking search, telling her location, "My dear, you want a vantage point that reminds you every day how small our troubles can be." She took a moment to appreciate that vantage point, letting the crashing surf calm her mind. Soon, she settled into the spacious study that doubled as her home office. A large portrait of Arthur hung on the wall. He was captured at a younger age, standing beside a fishing boat with a proud grin. Her throat tightened briefly. Setting her jaw, she turned to her laptop, which glowed to life with a quiet hum. She had set up multiple password-protected folders for precisely this scenario, though she never expected to truly need them. A faint knock sounded at the door. She rose to answer, expecting the caretaker or perhaps a morning package. Instead, she found Marcus Reeves, dressed in casual slacks and a button-down, holding a thick briefcase. His dark hair was cropped close, and a few silver strands at the temples gave him a distinguished air. She recalled that he was about Charlie's age, but carried himself differently, more guarded, more direct. "Early start," Helen said, stepping aside to let him in. Marcus responded with a grim smile. "Morning is the best time to strategize, isn't it?" He followed her into the study and placed his briefcase on a side table. "I did some preliminary digging last night. You ready for this?" Helen perched on the edge of her desk chair, anxiety flickering beneath her calm exterior. "Yes. Lay it on me." Marcus popped open the briefcase and took out a laptop. Within seconds, he brought up a series of spreadsheets. "I've been tracking Charlie's business expenditures for the past 6 months, things that might hint at misappropriation or hidden assets. There's some interesting stuff, including multiple charges at a luxury baby boutique. He might be stocking up, or it could be a front for something else." Helen raised an eyebrow. "He never mentioned those purchases to me." Marcus scrolled further. "Also, Sabrina's credit card statements show charges at high-end clothing stores. Possibly Charlie paid those bills. No direct proof yet, but let's say it aligns with the notion he's been financing her more than just paying a secretary's salary." Helen folded her arms. "So he's definitely serious about this baby. Or at least about Sabrina. Have you found anything linking him to transferring ownership or forging my signature on any documents related to the beach house?" Marcus gave a short shake of his head. "Not yet, but I'll keep looking." Meanwhile, you might consider the legal angles. If Charlie tries to claim community property rights over the house, we need to highlight the trust arrangement and inheritance structure. Yum. Helen nodded. I'll prepare everything, including the fact that my father insisted on separate funds. It's all in writing. She paused, feeling the old lawyer's instinct stirring. Marcus, we're going to do this by the book. But if they want to play dirty, I won't be caught unprepared. Marcus offered a firm nod. Good, because from what I heard, they're not planning to play nice. It was nearly noon when Helen's phone buzzed with a text from Charlie. We need to talk, face to face, tonight. She frowned at the screen, considering the gall of the request. After last night's fiasco, he wanted to corner her again. She suspected it was a trap to gauge how she would react legally. Nonetheless, she typed a quick response. Fine. 7 p.m., my law office. You come alone. Despite her personal tumult, Helen's professional duties beckoned. By early afternoon, she arrived at the Morris and Pierce law offices, a modest yet respected firm in the heart of the city. She had founded it with her father's guidance before he passed, and later partnered with a close colleague, Janet Pierce. Over the years, they specialized in high-asset divorces, ironically helping women in situations not unlike Helen's current crisis. Inside her corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the bustling downtown. Files stacked on her desk covered everything from prenuptial disputes to corporate partnership dissolutions. She remembered a time when Charlie had teased her. You handle the messy splits. I handle the money deals together. We're unstoppable. The bittersweet memory grated her nerves now. Janet Pierce, a petite brunette with an air of quiet authority, stopped by. Helen, you look like you haven't slept, she remarked gently. Everything okay? Helen considered deflecting, but realized she needed transparency from someone she trusted. Charlie, she said, voice taut. He's having an affair with his secretary, Sabrina. She's allegedly pregnant. They want the beach house. Janet's eyes widened in disbelief. He told you that openly. My God. Helen managed a grim smile. It gets better. He expects me to just hand it over. Janet's features hardened. Do you want me to represent you in this, or do you feel comfortable handling it yourself? We can bring in another partner if you'd rather keep distance. A swirl of conflicting thoughts rose in Helen's mind. Ethically, she knew representing herself in her own divorce would be fraught with complications, and yet, no one understood her finances or her father's trust better than she did. I'll direct the strategy, she decided, but I might need you to be the official face in court, if it comes to that. Janet nodded. Understood. Anything you need. And if I can give a bit of personal advice, don't let him see you rattle. Men like that feed on perceived weakness. Helen exhaled. Believe me, after last night, I doubt he thinks I'm weak, but I appreciate the backup. They reviewed key documents, verifying every detail about the trust's formation. Arthur Morris had been meticulous, insisting on separate accounts and legal structures so that Helen's inheritance couldn't be siphoned off by anyone else. The more Janet read, the more impressed she seemed. This is bulletproof, Janet said finally, as long as you haven't commingled any funds for repairs or remodeling using joint accounts. Charlie has no claim. Helen's lips curved in a sad smile. Dad was a brilliant old man. He always told me never to let my guard down, even with someone I thought I loved. She glanced at the clock. Speaking of which, Charlie's supposed to show up in a few hours. Let's see if he has the nerve. 7 in the evening came faster than Helen expected. She found herself in the firm's modest conference room, a sleek space with a long oval table, high-backed chairs, and a large monitor on the far wall for presentations. Soft overhead lighting illuminated the polished surface. reflecting the tension in her own eyes as she waited for Charlie's arrival. Just as the clock struck the hour, Charlie stepped in. He looked uneasy, a bruise-like redness shadowing his left cheek where Helen had slapped him the previous night. His usual air of confidence had dimmed. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, and his suit was slightly rumpled. No Sabrina in sight. Without preamble, he sank into one of the chairs. "You slapped me in front of an entire restaurant. Helen," he said, voice subdued yet simmering with accusation. "That's not exactly the behavior of a rational spouse." Helen kept her composure, folding her hands on the table. "I'm rational enough to know you blindsided me with a pregnancy announcement and a demand for my father's house. You deserved that slap, though I'm not proud of losing my temper." She paused, meeting his gaze steadily. "So what do you want?" "Charlie, why this meeting?" He ran a hand over his jaw. Exhaling, "I was hoping we could settle this quietly. If you insist on fighting me, it's just going to turn ugly. I know you have legal structures in place, but let's be real. We both contributed to the marriage for 20 years. A judge might see the beach house as community property." A flicker of anger sparked in Helen. "I contributed the inheritance. I structured the purchase, and my father put clauses to protect it from exactly this. You want to test me in court? Go ahead." She leaned forward slightly. "But you should know that if you push, I'll counterclaim on everything you own." "Everything." Charlie's jaw tightened. "I was trying to do the decent thing by coming to you first. Sabrina and we want to raise this baby in a place that's stable. But if you'd rather see me bankrupt—" Helen snorted. "Stable, you think you can waltz in, cast me aside like a used towel, and claim the one property that means the most to me? I don't think so. And I know you, Charlie. You won't go bankrupt. You'll shift money around, hide assets, do anything to manipulate the system. You've always played the angles." He stared at her, a mix of anger and something akin to regret in his gaze. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then he said, "Sabrina isn't just some fling. She's carrying my child, Helen. I never meant for it to happen this way, but it did. And now I have to do right by them." Helen felt a stab of betrayal, but she channeled it into cold resolve. "Do right by them on your own dime. The house isn't yours to give. My father left it so that no one could ever push me out of my own sanctuary." She took a slow, steadying breath. "If you have nothing else, this conversation is over. Expect divorce papers soon." Charlie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine," he said, voice strained. "But remember, you drew first blood when you humiliated me. Don't blame me for whatever happens next." He rose abruptly, chair scraping the floor, and walked out, leaving Helen with a trembling adrenaline rush. She closed her eyes, letting the echo of the door click fade. The battle lines were drawn. Now, it was time to show Charlie and his mistress that Arthur Morris's daughter was not to be trifled with. 2 days later, Helen received an envelope delivered by certified mail. Inside were divorce papers filed on Charlie's behalf, citing irreconcilable differences. She almost laughed at the banality of that phrase, how neatly it disguised the betrayal and audacity that had triggered this avalanche. Accompanying the main documents was a separate motion seeking temporary rights to the beach house on the grounds that Sabrina's pregnancy required immediate stable housing. Helen took the papers straight to Janet Pierce's office. "Digas. I guess this is the official escalation," she said, handing over the documents. She felt a swirl of anger and disbelief, but also a strange sense of relief that everything was now out in the open. Janet scanned the pages, eyebrows rising. "He's asking for exclusive use and possession of the beach house during the divorce proceedings." Bold. "He's probably banking on the court giving sympathy to a pregnant woman." Helen stiffened at the mention of Sabrina. "I suppose they're playing the emotional angle. But legally, they don't have a leg to stand on if we prove how the property was funded and titled. Janet nodded. We'll respond with evidence of the trust, the inheritance, and the fact that none of your joint accounts were used for major improvements. We should also argue that your father's clear intention was to keep this property separate. A determined set appeared on Helen's face. Good, let's do it. Also, I want to challenge Sabrina's pregnancy claim. Not that I doubt she's pregnant, but I want a paternity test. Janet blinked. That's a bold move. Are you prepared for the fallout? Helen's smile was thin. If she's truly carrying his baby, fine, but I want them to prove it. Nothing about this woman suggests honesty. And if there's any chance Charlie's being conned, I want that revealed in court. Janet inhaled. All right, I'll see if we can file a motion to require medical verification or a preliminary paternity test, but that might not happen until after the child is born, depending on the jurisdiction's stance. Helen rubbed her temples. I know, but put it in writing anyway. It sends a message that we're not just rolling over. She let out a weary sigh. I never thought I'd be in this position. Janet, spending my career helping other women fight for their property, only to end up protecting my own from my own husband. Janet gave her a sympathetic look. Sometimes the best attorneys find themselves in personal battles they never expected. You'll handle this with the same skill you've shown your clients. Helen, and you have me. Marcus, the entire firm behind you. Helen nodded gratefully, though her heart felt heavy. She thought of her father's portrait in her study, the way his eyes sparkled with pride whenever she won a tough case for a deserving client. He would have been so furious at Charlie, she mused, but he'd also be proud to see me standing up for myself. She gave Janet a quick hug, then headed back to her own office. A fresh wave of determination coursed through her. If Charlie and Sabrina wanted to brandish a pregnancy and claim they deserved everything, well, they'd have to do it under the bright glare of legal scrutiny. Marcus's investigation produced its first real bombshell a few days later. He strode into Helen's office just after lunch, his expression taut with urgency. Without a word, he closed the door behind him and handed her a manila folder. The label read, Sabrina Holloway, Private. Helen flipped it open. At the top was a photo of Sabrina outside a luxury spa. Marcus had circled a date and time stamp. The following pages revealed phone records, credit card receipts, and more photographs. One in particular stood out Sabrina in the arms of a young man outside a downtown nightclub. The timestamp overlapped suspiciously with the alleged date of conception if she was indeed pregnant with Charlie's child. What am I looking at here? Helen asked, flipping between images. Marcus took a seat across from her. That young man is Kyle Bishop, a trainer at the same gym Sabrina frequents. He's in his early 30s, which is still older than Sabrina, but definitely younger than Charlie. They've been meeting regularly for months, more than just personal training sessions from what my contact observed. Helen's stomach tightened. So, are you implying the child might not be Charlie's? Marcus nodded gravely. It's very possible. The surveillance indicates they were together during the time frame that Sabrina claims the pregnancy started. I also have some texts, though I can't confirm they're from Sabrina without more hacking than I'm legally allowed to do, but it seems she's been telling Kyle that he could be the father. Helen felt a swirl of emotions, a flicker of triumph, a sense of disbelief, and an underlying sadness at how badly everything had unraveled. So, Sabrina's running a con on Charlie, or at least playing both sides. Maybe she's telling Charlie it's his for financial security. Telling Kyle something else entirely. Marcus tapped the folder. She might just be covering all her bases. If Kyle doesn't earn enough to support her lifestyle, maybe she sees Charlie as the better long-term bet. It fits a pattern I've seen before. Helen let out a slow exhale. This changes things. If we can prove in court that Sabrina isn't sure about the baby's paternity, it might undercut their entire claim to the house. Marcus nodded. We should be careful, though. A court might view this as a fishing expedition unless we have more concrete proof. But we can at least use the possibility of challenging paternity to rattle them. Helen weighed the evidence in her mind. Her goal wasn't just to humiliate Sabrina, but to protect her inheritance. Still, the idea that Charlie might be paying for someone else's child stoked a certain dark satisfaction within her. All right, she said, closing the folder. Let's keep digging. I want every piece of evidence you can find that ties Sabrina and Kyle together. If it's strong enough, we might push for an early paternity test. That could blow their claim out of the water. Marcus stood, returning her determined gaze with one of his own. Understood. But watch your back, Helen. If Sabrina realizes we're on to her, she might double down or get desperate. Helen nodded, her grip tightening on the folder. She almost felt a pang of pity for Charlie. Almost. But then again, he made his choice, and now he was about to learn that betrayals tend to return with a vengeance. The next evening, Helen sat alone in the living room of the beach house, a single lamp casting a warm glow over the eclectic mix of old furniture and modern art. She'd never replaced the floral print armchair her father once loved to sit in. It remained a comforting relic of his presence. After a day of grappling with legal forms and new revelations about Sabrina, she found herself sipping chamomile tea, attempting to calm the swirl of her thoughts. She contemplated whether to call Charlie and confront him directly with what she'd learned. Part of her wanted to fling the evidence in his face, demand that he stop this charade. But she knew better. Direct confrontation would only give him a chance to prepare a counter. It was always more strategic to move silently until the moment was right. A soft tap on the glass door startled her. She rose cautiously, phone in hand, unsure of who would be visiting at this hour. Peering past the thin curtains, she recognized the silhouette her friend and law partner, Janet Pierce. Helen unlocked the door, letting Janet in. The other woman carried a small cardboard box and wore a sympathetic expression. I know it's late, Janet said, stepping inside, but I had something delivered to the office after hours. Thought you'd want to see it right away. Helen gestured for her to sit, and they both settled onto the couch. Janet placed the box on the coffee table. It's from an anonymous sender. No return address, but it has your name and the firm's address on it. Security scanned it, no bombs or tracking devices. Helen raised an eyebrow. Curiosity piqued. She opened the box. Inside lay a stack of photos and an unmarked flash drive. Glancing at the top photo, Helen's eyes widened. It was a snapshot of Sabrina with Kyle, arms wrapped around each other intimately in what appeared to be a hotel corridor. Sabrina looked pregnant, her belly just starting to show, but the expressions on both faces were undeniably romantic. Not at all reminiscent of a casual friend. Helen picked up the flash drive, a swirl of dread and intrigue knotting her stomach. Could be more incriminating pictures. She mused. Janet nodded gravely. Yes, this might be from someone who has a personal vendetta against Sabrina, a jealous co-worker, or maybe Kyle himself if things went sour. But whoever it is, they clearly want to expose Sabrina. Helen flipped through the pictures methodically, Sabrina checking into the hotel. Sabrina leaving the next morning wearing Kyle's jacket. Sabrina at a prenatal clinic with Kyle beside her. The timeline, as far as she could gather from the date stamps, overlapped exactly with the period Charlie was claiming as the baby's conception date. She breathed a slow exhale. This is the smoking gun. Potentially. If we can verify these photos, it means Sabrina was still deeply involved with Kyle. So how can she be so sure it's Charlie's baby? Janet tapped the photos. We need to authenticate them. But yes, they're powerful. If we present this in court, it undermines their entire claim for the house based on family stability. I can already see the judge's reaction. Helen carefully slid the photos back into the box, determination lighting her eyes. Let's make sure we do this right. A single slip-up, and we could be accused of playing dirty. But if this is legitimate, Charlie and Sabrina's case might crumble before they even set foot in the courtroom. Morning brought a thick fog that blanketed the coastline, rendering the usually breathtaking ocean view into a ghostly haze. Helen found it oddly symbolic so many details of her personal life were murky now, hidden behind layers of deception. Still dressed in a light robe, she stood by the bay window, sipping black coffee and contemplating the box of evidence on her dining table. She heard a buzzing from the security panel near the front door. Moving to check the small screen, she saw Marcus standing outside in the driveway. Opening the door, she let him in, noticing that he carried the same intense expression as before, a sure sign of new developments. "Morning," he said curtly, stepping inside. He handed her a sealed envelope, registered mail again, from a different address. "Let's see if it's more surprises." Helen nodded, tore open the envelope, and found a single page typed in bold, Helen Morris. "If you want the upper hand, ask about Sabrina's medical records from St. Lucian's clinic. Her story isn't what she claims." Helen frowned. No signature, no return address, just a cryptic tip. "Marcus, you have any idea who sent this?" He shook his head. Could be anyone with a grudge against Sabrina, or maybe someone who wants to watch Charlie burn. The clinic reference is interesting. Though, Sabrina did mention a prenatal appointment, right? Helen set the note down, crossing her arms. "Yes, but I assumed she'd go to a standard OB/GYN, not somewhere hush-hush. St. Lucian's is known for its exclusive clientele and top-tier confidentiality. Celebrities go there." She paused, scanning the note again. "You think it's possible she's not pregnant at all? Or maybe the pregnancy is high risk. This is the second anonymous tip suggesting Sabrina's lying." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "Could be. Or it could be that she was pregnant but isn't anymore. Miscarriage, or something else. I'll investigate. You want me to look into hospital records?" Helen hesitated. "We have to do it legally, subpoenas or discovery motions. But maybe we can confirm if she was ever actually registered as a patient there. Let's keep it above board, though. If we cross the line, Charlie's lawyers will paint us as privacy violators." Marcus gave a short nod. "I'll keep it legit. We can also try to approach this from the angle of requesting medical verification due to the property claim. Judges sometimes require proof when pregnancy is the basis for urgent relief." Helen appreciated the thoroughness. "Good thinking." She gestured to the box on the table. "By the way, we got more photos. Anonymous again, Sabrina and Kyle at a hotel, clinic visits together, everything." Marcus leafed through a few of them, his brow furrowing. If this is real, Sabrina's definitely playing both men. She might not even be sure who the father is if there's a baby at all. He glanced at Helen. "You're building quite the arsenal of evidence. Just be careful about how you use it." Helen inhaled. "I know. I won't just fling this at them in some dramatic confrontation. We'll go through proper channels. Let Janet handle the legal angle. If Sabrina is lying, the courts will see. And if by some chance she's telling the truth, well, then Charlie's still not getting the house." Marcus allowed a rare grin. "Now that's the Helen I know, fiercely prepared. Keep it up. Let me see if I can track down something about St. Lucian's. We'll compare notes soon." Helen walked him out, the damp, foggy air swirling around them. She felt the weight of these new clues pressing down like the coastal mist. But with each tip and each revelation, she was inching closer to unraveling the truth and safeguarding her father's legacy. Late that afternoon, Helen found herself in the polished corridors of the courthouse, a place she'd walked countless times in her career. It felt surreal that now she was here for her own divorce hearing, a preliminary hearing, at least, to address temporary orders about the beach house. She navigated past the security checkpoint with a nod to a guard who recognized her, then headed up to the third floor. In a small conference room adjacent to the main chambers, Janet was waiting, dressed in her usual tailored suit. "You ready?" she asked quietly, handing Helen a file. "This is the summary of our position. The house belongs to your trust, funded by Arthur's inheritance, never commingled with marital assets." Helen flipped through the pages, reaffirming what she already knew, but wanted fresh in her mind. "I'm ready," she said, adjusting the collar of her blouse. "Are they inside yet?" Janet motioned toward the double doors. Charlie's attorney arrived, along with Sabrina. "I believe. Brace yourself." Helen steeled her nerves. She recalled her father's voice in times like this. "Don't let them see your fear. Use it to sharpen your mind." She entered the hearing room, a modest space with wooden benches and a few lawyers milling about. Behind the petitioner's table sat Charlie, flanked by a woman in a charcoal suit. Sabrina was nowhere to be seen. Charlie looked up as Helen approached, and for a second, their eyes locked. She tried to discern any hint of regret or remorse in his expression, but found none. He looked tense, but determined. The ring he used to wear her father's wedding ring that she'd once gifted him was conspicuously absent. The clerk directed them to stand before the judge, a stern-faced woman named the Honorable Regina Valdez, known for her no-nonsense approach. Once the formalities were out of the way, Charlie's attorney launched into a prepared statement about why the beach house was essential for the pregnant mistress, who was allegedly suffering stress and needed stable housing. "Mrs. Morris has ample resources," the attorney said, her voice projecting easily across the room, denying Mr. Vasquez and Ms. Holloway the right to reside in a property that was, for all intents and purposes, a marital home, would be an injustice, especially with a child on the way. Helen could almost feel her blood pressure spike. She kept her expression neutral, biting back the urge to interject. Once Charlie's attorney finished, Janet calmly presented the trust documents, highlighting that the house was purchased exclusively with inherited funds. Janet also noted the suspicious timeline of Sabrina's pregnancy and the fact that a paternity test hadn't been conducted. The judge listened carefully, occasionally scribbling notes. After both sides concluded, she said, "I am inclined to deny the request for exclusive occupancy at this stage. There is insufficient evidence that Ms. Holloway's condition necessitates urgent transfer of property. Furthermore, the trust appears to place clear restrictions on ownership." Helen exhaled, relief washing over her. Charlie's face hardened. He muttered something to his attorney, who placed a reassuring hand on his arm. The judge then set a future date for a more detailed hearing, instructing both parties to maintain the status quo. As Helen exited, she caught a glimpse of Charlie shooting her a look of pure frustration. "Round one to me," she thought, but she knew better than to celebrate too soon. This was only the beginning. That evening, Helen returned to the beach house, her mind still replaying the curt nod Judge Valdez had given. She'd won a small victory. The house remained hers, at least for now. Yet she knew Charlie wouldn't back down easily. She half expected him to show up at her doorstep, raging. But instead, the house stood still under the pale moonlight. She microwaved a simple dinner, her appetite faint. Having spent the day locked in a legal skirmish for her personal property was more draining than any case she'd handled on behalf of a client. She ate alone, the hush of the ocean outside a stark contrast to the turbulence in her thoughts. Once finished, she tucked the dishes away and settled on the living room couch, mindlessly scrolling through her phone. A string of messages from old friends lit up the screen. Apparently, word had gotten out about her divorce. Most offered condolences or sly curiosity. One, however, was from an unknown number. It read, "If you want Sabrina's real secret, check the financial logs at St. Lucian's. She paid for a special procedure." A friend. Helen's heart leapt. Another anonymous tip, referencing the same clinic. She could no longer ignore the pattern. A special procedure could mean anything: termination, fertility treatments, or something even more complex. But if Sabrina wasn't pregnant at all, or if she'd ended a pregnancy, that would unravel Charlie's entire justification, deciding she'd had enough tension for one day. Helen took a bath, letting the hot water soak away the tension in her shoulders. She lit a lavender-scented candle, something she rarely did unless she needed deep relaxation. The flickering flame conjured memories of her father, sitting with her after her mother's death, gently reminding her to find moments of peace amid chaos. But her mind wouldn't stay quiet. She found herself rehearsing how she'd present the new tip to Marcus, how they might get subpoena power for Sabrina's medical records. Would that be enough to open a window into her real condition? If Sabrina had truly never been pregnant or had lost the baby and kept it a secret, it meant that Charlie was fighting for a phantom cause. After the bath, she slipped into pajamas and tried to watch a movie, but her thoughts kept drifting. Finally, she surrendered and grabbed her laptop, deciding to send a quick email to Janet. Got another anonymous tip about St. Lucian's clinic. Possibly Sabrina had a procedure that contradicts her pregnancy claim. Let's push for a medical record subpoena if feasible. Helen, with that, she shut the laptop, forcing herself to at least try sleeping. Lying in the darkness, she recalled how, on their wedding day, Charlie had made a toast about building a future together, how the beach house was a symbol of their union. She realized now it had never symbolized union for him. It was just another asset in his eyes. Her father's voice came to her again in memory, urging her to protect what was rightfully hers. As the waves murmured beyond the windows, Helen whispered to the night, "I won't lose this place. Not to him, not to a lie." Early the next morning, Helen awoke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. She blinked, still drowsy, and grabbed it, seeing Marcus's name on the caller ID. Heart pounding slightly, she accepted the call. "I made progress," Marcus said without greeting. "One of my contacts at St. Lucian's confirmed Sabrina was indeed a patient, but I can't get the procedure details without a subpoena. Still, I have enough circumstantial data to suspect there was no ongoing pregnancy after last month." Helen sat upright, the last threads of sleep dissolving instantly. "So you think she either had a miscarriage or something else?" Marcus's voice turned grave. "From what I can gather, it's more likely she had a termination or a procedure related to fertility complications. The timing is suspicious. If she'd had a miscarriage, typically there'd be different notes in the billing. A termination might have a distinct code. Again, I can't confirm everything, but it aligns with the tip you got." Helen pressed a hand to her forehead. "So Sabrina's parading around, claiming she's pregnant when she's not, or at least not anymore. That's the strongest possibility." Marcus agreed, "which means she's effectively defrauding Charlie. He might be in on it or might be clueless. Hard to say." Helen exhaled, a complex swirl of relief and anger welling up. Relief, because if Sabrina wasn't pregnant, it stripped their main leverage. Anger, because it confirmed the sheer audacity of the deceit. "Marcus, this is the smoking gun we needed. If we can get these records into evidence, Charlie's case collapses." Marcus hesitated. "We'll need to follow legal channels. You'll have to file a motion for a subpoena. With enough probable cause, we might get a judge to approve it. But you know how delicate medical privacy is. Sabrina's lawyers will fight tooth and nail. Helen closed her eyes, already strategizing. Then we'll fight back. I'm not letting them use a fake pregnancy to justify taking my house. She paused, considering the moral angle. Though I do feel a certain pity for Charlie if he's completely in the dark. He's being taken for a ride. But that doesn't excuse what he did to me. Marcus grunted in agreement. The next hearing date is set. Right. You might want to file an emergency motion to accelerate the discovery on medical grounds. Helen nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see her. Yes, I'll talk to Janet about it immediately. Thanks, Marcus. You've been a lifeline here. After hanging up, Helen quickly dressed and rushed out the door, the salty morning air bracing against her face. She drove the winding coastal road toward her law office, adrenaline surging. By the time she reached her desk, she found Janet already waiting with the files. Helen blurted out the update Marcus confirmed Sabrina had some procedure at St. Lucian's. Likely not pregnant. Janet's eyes widened. This is big, Helen. Let's draft that motion. If we're right, then Sabrina's entire story is a sham, and that means they lose the sympathy angle in front of the judge. Helen gave a decisive nod, flipping open her laptop. As her fingers began typing the motion, she felt a resurgence of courage. This was no longer a question of whether she'd keep her house. It was a question of how thoroughly she'd exposed the lie that threatened to steal it. The hearing on the emergency motion to subpoena Sabrina's medical records took place a week later, in the same small courtroom where Helen had previously fended off Charlie's attempt for temporary possession. Judge Valdez presided again, her stern gaze flicking between counsel. Charlie and his attorney sat on one side, with Charlie's expression dark and tense. Sabrina was absent, fueling the suspicion that she wanted to avoid public scrutiny. Janet presented Helen's motion with calm precision, citing the anonymous tips, photographic evidence of Sabrina's apparent relationship with Kyle Bishop, and the strong likelihood that she had undergone a procedure inconsistent with a continuing pregnancy. Your Honor, Janet concluded, we are not intruding on Ms. Holloway's medical privacy arbitrarily. Rather, we have substantial reason to believe she is falsifying a pregnancy as leverage in a property dispute. We request limited disclosure of her medical records from St. Lucian's to confirm or refute this claim. Charlie's attorney, a formidable woman named Adeline Grace, stood to counter. This is an outrageous invasion of Ms. Holloway's privacy. My client, Mr. Vasquez, believes wholeheartedly that Sabrina is carrying his child. Ms. Morris is using questionable evidence to cast doubt and smear Ms. Holloway's reputation. A subpoena of medical records would set a dangerous precedent. Janet remained composed, responding, Ms. Grace, we have documented evidence suggesting that Ms. Holloway may no longer be pregnant. If so, her claims before this court and by extension, Mr. Vasquez's claims lack merit. The request is narrowly tailored to confirm or deny a single fact. Is Ms. Holloway pregnant? Judge Valdez steepled her fingers. I understand the gravity of breaching medical privacy. However, the property dispute's urgency does hinge on Ms. Holloway's alleged pregnancy. If she's not pregnant, the entire argument for immediate transfer of property collapses. She paused, glancing at Charlie, who stared resolutely at the table. Mr. Vasquez, do you have anything you'd like to add? Charlie's face twitched. He stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, I know Sabrina is pregnant. She told me. We've seen doctors. This is just a witch hunt by Helen to ruin my life. Judge Valdez raised an eyebrow. Mr. Vasquez, the motion is not about your personal relationship, but about verifying a central claim. Do you oppose the subpoena I do? Charlie said, voice trembling with emotion. It's invasive. If Helen is so confident, she should find proof without dragging Sabrina's medical privacy through the mud. Janet prepared to counter again, but the judge held up a hand. Enough. I've heard enough to make a provisional ruling. In the interest of resolving this dispute swiftly, I will grant a limited subpoena. St. Lucian's Clinic will be required to produce records confirming the current status of Ms. Holloway's pregnancy, specifically whether she is under obstetric care for a viable pregnancy. A murmur rippled through the small audience. Dorman? Adeline Grace placed a hand on Charlie's arm, urging him to keep his composure. Judge Valdez rapped her gavel lightly. Court is adjourned for now. We'll reconvene once those records are provided. Let's schedule a follow-up hearing in 10 days. As people stood to leave, Helen caught Charlie's eye. She saw a mixture of defiance and flickering doubt. Perhaps he was beginning to suspect that Sabrina wasn't telling him the whole truth. Helen felt no pity. He had cast her aside, tried to steal her sanctuary. If he was about to learn the harsh reality of Sabrina's deception, so be it. She walked out, each step a reaffirmation of her resolve to see this through, no matter how messy it got. 10 days felt like an eternity to Helen. Each sunrise brought a mounting anxiety over what St. Lucian's records might reveal. By day 3, she found herself pacing her beach house more often than she cared to admit. She stayed busy with other client cases at the firm, but her mind always wandered back to one pressing question. What if Sabrina truly is pregnant, and we've all been chasing a wild goose? Marcus did his best to keep her focused, sending daily updates that included little tidbits, rumors that Sabrina had booked a secret trip, a message that Charlie's financial accounts were shifting funds around. On the legal front, Janet filed further documentation to reinforce the separate property status of the beach house. Meanwhile, Charlie's attorney, Adeline Grace, fired back with a barrage of motions accusing Helen of conducting a smear campaign. Late one afternoon, Helen received a phone call from Janet, the tension in her colleague's voice evident. Helen, you're not going to believe what just arrived. The documents from St. Lucian's. Helen's heart jumped. Already I thought the judge gave them 10 days. They must have complied sooner. I need you at the office, Janet said quickly. We should review this together, in private. Helen grabbed her keys, drove the coastal road with adrenaline prickling her skin. The autumn sky overhead was cloudy, threatening rain. She recalled her father's voice from long ago, telling her how storms often broke just before the biggest revelations. She wondered if his words would hold true today. At the firm, she rushed into Janet's office. There, spread out on the desk, lay a neatly typed letter from St. Lucian's legal department and a slim envelope marked "Confidential." Janet gestured for Helen to sit. Then she read from the letter, "According to our records, Ms. Sabrina Holloway was admitted for a dilation and curettage procedure on the 20th of last month, following fetal demise at approximately 8 weeks gestation. The procedure was completed successfully. As of the date of this letter, Ms. Holloway is not currently under obstetric care for an ongoing pregnancy." A hush settled as Helen let the words sink in. Her gaze jumped to the date, the 20th of last month. Sabrina would have been around 12 weeks pregnant if her timeline was correct, but the clinic indicated the pregnancy had ended at 8 weeks and was medically terminated after fetal demise. Janet cleared her throat. It means Sabrina was pregnant, but miscarried or ended the pregnancy about 2 months ago. So she's definitely not pregnant now. Helen closed her eyes, feeling a complex wave of pity and anger. Pity, because a miscarriage, if it was genuinely, that was a tragic event. Anger, because Sabrina clearly continued to claim the pregnancy existed for leverage. How could she pull Charlie into this elaborate charade? She opened her eyes again. We need to bring this to the court immediately. Charlie's entire claim hinges on the idea that Sabrina's still pregnant with his child. She squared her shoulders. As for Sabrina, if she really did lose the baby, then doubling down on the lie is unconscionable. Janet nodded gravely. Let's file a motion to dismiss any future claim regarding pregnancy-based housing needs. The judge will want to see these records. Helen let out a long breath. This changes everything. Let's see how Charlie reacts when we expose the truth. Helen and Janet wasted no time filing a motion to amend the proceedings, attaching the newly acquired medical records under seal. The motion stated that Sabrina Holloway's pregnancy had ended and that there was no current medical basis for demanding residence in the beach house. A hearing date was set for the following week, and Helen braced herself for another tense showdown in front of Judge Valdez. The next morning, however, Charlie made his move first. He arrived at Morris and Pierce without warning, bursting into the reception area and demanding to see Helen immediately. The front desk receptionist, alarmed by his tone, hurried to fetch her. I'm busy. When Helen stepped into the hallway, she found Charlie pacing, anger radiating from him like heat waves. What the hell did you do? He spat, eyes narrowing, subpoenaing Sabrina's medical records. That's low, Helen. Even for you? Helen squared her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. We followed due process. Charlie, the judge approved it. If you're upset, take it up with the law. And considering Sabrina's not actually pregnant, maybe you should be more angry with her. Charlie's face contorted. You don't know anything about it. She lost the baby. She's grieving. And you come stomping in, broadcasting her private medical history to win your damned house. A flicker of sympathy crossed Helen's expression. I'm sorry she lost the pregnancy. No one deserves that pain. But lying to the court, continuing to pretend she's pregnant, that's on her. She crossed her arms. And let's not forget, you tried to steal the house by leveraging that pregnancy. You. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly torn between rage and something softer. She wanted to wait before telling everyone about the miscarriage, thought she might still, I don't know, that maybe it was a mistake by the doctors, or that she'd get pregnant again, and no one would notice the gap. She was desperate. Helen took a step closer. Desperate for what? Exactly to lock you in, to force you to give her a house. She paused, lowering her voice. Charlie, I've known you for years. I might hate what you did to me, but I know you're not stupid. How could you not see the signs? He looked away, bitterness twisting his features. Maybe I didn't want to see. After so many years, I was tired of feeling overshadowed by your success, your father's endless warnings, your firm. Sabrina made me feel needed, special. I guess I wanted to believe her. Helen felt a pang of old wounds reopening. Instead, you got played. She's using your guilt and your finances, and you nearly lost everything to a lie. His expression hardened again. Don't act so righteous. You and I both know you don't care about my well-being. You just care about winning. Helen shook her head. No, Charlie, I care about protecting what's mine. You started this war by bringing her into our marriage. Now you're upset because the truth is out? She gestured toward the door. You should leave. We can handle the rest in court. He stared at her, fury and regret battling in his eyes. Finally, he turned abruptly, marching out of the office. Helen watched him go, an uncomfortable heaviness settling in her chest. She'd gotten what she wanted, proof. Sabrina was lying, yet the cost in human wreckage felt tragically high. Later that week, the follow-up hearing took place, and the mood in the courtroom was markedly different from before. Judge Valdez had reviewed the sealed medical records. Her expression was stern as she addressed both parties. Charlie appeared alone, his attorney Adeline Grace by his side. Sabrina was conspicuously absent yet again. Helen, standing next to Janet, observed how Charlie avoided eye contact. His posture was defeated. His once proud shoulders slumped. When the judge asked if he would continue to assert Sabrina's pregnancy as a basis for demanding the beach house, Charlie's attorney hesitated before quietly stating, "We withdraw that claim." A subdued ripple of reaction passed through the small courtroom. Even those who weren't privy to the full backstory could sense the dramatic shift. Judge Valdez nodded. Given that the primary argument for urgent housing is withdrawn, the court sees no reason to continue any motions for temporary possession. The beach house remains under Ms. Morris's control. We will now proceed to the broader divorce and property division discussions. Adeline cast a quick glance at Charlie, then asked for a brief recess. During that recess, Helen overheard whispers between Charlie and his attorney. She caught fragments like, "We can't fight her on this," and "the trust is bulletproof." It was everything she had prepared to hear. Once court reconvened, Charlie's side requested a continuance to renegotiate their strategy. The judge granted it, clearly unimpressed by the sudden about-face. Helen and Janet walked out of the courtroom together, relief mingling with a sense of unfinished business. Outside, camera flashes sparked like lightning apparently. Word had spread about a high-profile couple in a dramatic, scandal-ridden divorce. Helen shielded her face, unwilling to feed the gossip. Journalists hurled questions about the fake pregnancy scandal, but she stayed silent, slipping into a waiting car with Janet close behind. Inside the safety of the vehicle, Janet exhaled, turning to Helen. They've completely lost the pregnancy angle. Now they'll probably try standard property division arguments, claim some form of financial contributions to the house's upkeep. Helen grimaced. Let them try. My father's inheritance never once went into joint accounts. Charlie can't produce a single receipt that shows he contributed a significant portion to the house's purchase or renovation. Plus, the trust documents are airtight. Janet nodded. I agree. This last stunt might damage Charlie's credibility with the judge. And Sabrina, well, she might be out of the picture soon if she's not even showing up to court. Helen gazed out the window as the car wove through city streets. She remembered how hopeful and excited she'd been when she and Charlie first looked at the property with her father. We'll raise a family here if we can, Charlie had said. The irony stung. Now, she realized, he'd tried to use that very dream to snatch away her inheritance on behalf of a woman who had never even carried his child. A pang of sadness cut through her triumph. She wasn't heartless. She recognized there had been a real loss somewhere in Sabrina's story. But more than that, there was betrayal and manipulation. Still, Helen reminded herself, the house is safe for now. The divorce wasn't final, but the tide had clearly turned in her favor. Over the next few weeks, the case ground forward with the usual slow pace of legal proceedings. Helen continued to work at her firm, taking on client meetings and depositions by day, strategizing with Janet about her own case in the evenings. Marcus still fed her tidbits about Sabrina's whereabouts, apparently. She had vanished from the scene, possibly fleeing the humiliation of the miscarriage scandal. One overcast afternoon, Helen was at her desk reviewing settlement proposals when her assistant buzzed in. Helen, there's a man named Kyle Bishop here to see you. He says it's personal. Helen felt a jolt. She recognized the name instantly, the personal trainer Sabrina had been seeing. Send him in, she replied, taking a moment to steady herself. A moment later, Kyle entered. He was tall, athletic, with a nervous energy that manifested in the twitch of his hands. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, looking decidedly out of place in the crisp environment of a law office. Ms. Morris, he said, voice tinged with apprehension. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Helen gestured for him to sit. I'm surprised you came in person. I've seen some pictures that suggest you and Sabrina were close. He swallowed hard, nodding. We were, and I need to set the record straight. Sabrina told me she was pregnant with my child at one point. She claimed she was going to leave Charlie for me, but then she changed her story, said it might be Charlie's baby, and later told me she miscarried. Helen leaned forward. That's consistent with what we learned from medical records, except she kept pretending she was still pregnant to Charlie. Kyle nodded, agitation growing. Exactly. She lied to both of us. I think she wanted the best financial outcome. I'm not proud that I got involved with her while she was with Charlie, but I didn't know the extent of her manipulations. Helen studied his face, looking for signs of deceit. She saw guilt, embarrassment, perhaps a desire to make amends. Why are you here? Kyle, my lawyers can't prosecute Sabrina for lying to you, and I've already used the St. Lucian's records in court. Kyle took a shaky breath. I know, I want you to have these. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded packet of documents, texts, screenshots of her messages, plus some notes from her about how she planned to use Charlie if she couldn't get me to commit. She bragged about how easy it would be to convince a judge she was pregnant with his child. Helen's eyes widened. She accepted the packet, unfolding it to see multiple conversation threads. Sabrina's words were callous and calculated. One line read, "He's older, bored with his wife, and he believes whatever I say. I just need that house to seal the deal." A chill ran through Helen. Kyle, this could be significant. It proves Sabrina was conspiring to defraud Charlie out of my property. He nodded miserably. I'm done being part of her games. Do with it what you want. I just wanted to clear my conscience. Standing. He offered a tentative handshake. I'm sorry for my role in all this. Helen shook his hand, still absorbing the gravity of what she'd just read. Thank you, Kyle. This might finally put an end to their claims once and for all. As he left, Helen exhaled, her mind churning with the implications. With these messages, she could prove that Sabrina's pregnancy claim and her entire angle was a premeditated con. Not just a lie, but a deliberate scheme to swindle the house. This, Helen thought, might be the final nail in the coffin for Charlie's case. That evening, Helen invited Janet and Marcus to the beach house to discuss Kyle's revelations. They gathered around the dining table, where she'd laid out the packet of Sabrina's text messages. Janet skimmed through them, her expression darkening with each passing line. Marcus observed quietly, nodding at the timestamps that matched the key dates of Sabrina's supposed pregnancy. This is damning, Janet finally said, placing the papers down. Sabrina not only lied about being pregnant, but openly discussed how to manipulate Charlie into claiming the beach house. That's premeditated fraud in any legal sense. Helen nodded. So, I'm thinking we use these texts in a motion for summary judgment on the property issue. So, show the court that this entire fiasco was orchestrated by Sabrina, and Charlie was complicit or at least negligent enough to try pushing me out. Marcus tapped the table. I've also been digging deeper into Charlie's finances. He made no direct investment in your property after the initial purchase. It all came from Arthur Morris's trust. At best, Charlie might claim superficial contributions utilities, minor landscaping, that sort of thing, but the title remains outside community property. Janet sat back, exhaling. We could deliver a 1-2 punch, argue the house is irrevocably tied to Helen's separate estate, and show the court Sabrina's fraud. That should not only secure the house, but potentially entitle Helen to damages. Helen stared at the flickering candle in the center of the table, recalling how she'd left the restaurant that fateful night, feeling betrayed and humiliated. Now, a sense of vindication swelled inside her. Yet it was tinged with sadness. sadness at the marriage she'd lost, the illusions shattered, and the realization that her husband had been so easily duped. Or maybe he wasn't so easily duped, she thought. Maybe he just refused to see the truth because it served his ego. Let's move forward. Helen decided. File the motion for summary judgment. Attach Kyle's statements as an affidavit if he's willing to sign. Let's finalize this. Janet nodded, tapping on her laptop. I'll prep the documents first thing tomorrow. We should also ask for an expedited hearing. She paused, glancing at Helen. You realize this might break Charlie completely. If he finds out Sabrina used him, he might fold or he might lash out. Helen's jaw tightened. I'm past caring about his emotional state. He should have considered the consequences when he betrayed me in such a public, cruel manner. If he'd approached me honestly, maybe I would have found a civil arrangement. But he broke every bond of trust. Marcus stood, gathering the documents into a neat pile. I'll keep security tight around here, just in case. Charlie's known to be impulsive when cornered. And Sabrina? Well, who knows if she might resurface, more desperate than ever. Helen accompanied them to the door, the ocean breeze rushing into the foyer as they stepped out. She gazed into the darkness outside, feeling a cold bite to the wind. One last push, she told herself. And then this nightmare is over. The motion for summary judgment landed in the court's docket with surprising speed. To everyone's shock, Judge Valdez scheduled a hearing within 2 weeks. As the date approached, Helen's nerves were on a razor's edge. The court filing included transcripts of Sabrina's messages to Kyle, carefully redacted to maintain privacy, but clear enough to show her manipulative intent. Meanwhile, Charlie's camp remained eerily silent. Adeline Grace, his attorney, did not file any direct rebuttal except a brief statement claiming that Charlie had been unaware of Sabrina's deception. This was a stark contrast to the aggressive posture they'd maintained earlier. Helen wondered if Charlie was quietly unraveling behind the scenes, forced to confront the magnitude of Sabrina's betrayal. On the day of the hearing, Helen arrived at the courthouse early, accompanied by Janet. They found the hallway outside the assigned courtroom surprisingly empty, no reporters, no curious onlookers. A bailiff informed them that proceedings would begin in 15 minutes. 10 minutes later, Charlie walked in, alone once again. He looked thinner, haggard, as though he hadn't slept in days. His tie was crooked, and his hair had more gray in it than Helen remembered. She felt a complicated tug of pity watching him shuffle to the respondents' table. As the judge entered, everyone rose. Helen surveyed the room, no sign of Sabrina, and only a scattering of other attorneys there for unrelated cases. When proceedings commenced, Janet presented their motion, laying out how the text messages and medical evidence proved Sabrina's alleged pregnancy was a fraudulent scheme, and thus any claim to the beach house based on that premise was invalid. Then it was Charlie's turn. Adeline Grace cleared her throat, stood up, and took a measured pause. Your Honor, she said, my client, Mr. Vasquez, no longer disputes Ms. Morris's separate ownership of the beach house. We concede the property is hers, free and clear. Any claim we made relating to Ms. Holloway's pregnancy is hereby withdrawn. A hush fell. Even Janet seemed momentarily taken aback by the abrupt capitulation. Helen blinked, trying to process what this meant. Was Charlie truly giving up on the house? Judge Valdez folded her hands. So, Mr. Vasquez, you do not challenge the house's status as Ms. Morris's separate property. Charlie shook his head, voice barely audible. No, Your Honor, I was misled. I believed Sabrina, but the truth is clear now. He cast a glance at Helen, eyes heavy with a sorrow that seemed genuine. I apologize. A swirl of emotions tore through Helen. She dreamed of this moment, the moment Charlie would have to admit defeat. Yet seeing him so visibly broken muted her sense of triumph. Still, she couldn't forget the pain he caused. Judge Valdez nodded. Very well. I will grant Ms. Morris's motion for summary judgment regarding the property. The beach house remains her sole possession. Now, as for the rest of the divorce proceedings, Janet briefly discussed division of other assets, joint accounts, investments, personal property. Charlie hardly fought back, showing little interest in negotiating. Adeline Grace concluded with a resigned sigh. We'll work out a settlement agreement. My client is ready to move on. Helen gazed down at the polished wooden table, relief coursing through her. It's over, she thought. The house is mine, and not just in legal terms, but in final, irrevocable reality. Despite the legal resolution about the beach house, the overall divorce still needed formal finalization, which could take a few more months. But Helen already felt a vast weight lifted from her shoulders. She returned to the beach house that evening, walking each room as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. The sun was setting over the Pacific, casting an orange glow through the arched windows. She paused in the living room, where her father's favorite armchair stood, and let her eyes linger on the framed photo of him on a side table. Arthur Morris had passed away before seeing how this all played out, but Helen felt his presence like a comforting hand on her shoulder. Treading up the spiral staircase, she looked around the master bedroom once shared with Charlie. She realized that in the rush of legal battles, she'd never fully processed the emotional toll of dismantling their life together. This was where they'd talked about raising a family, where they'd shared joys and sorrows until it all soured. A soft chime interrupted her reverie. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call from Marcus. She picked up, stepping onto the balcony that overlooked the ocean. Marcus, she greeted, voice subdued. He gave a quiet chuckle. You sound half asleep. Busy day. Helen leaned against the balcony rail, the sea breeze tangling her hair. We got summary judgment for the house. Charlie backed off completely. Marcus sounded genuinely relieved. That's fantastic. Congratulations. You deserve this victory. Helen sighed. Yeah, I guess so. It doesn't feel like a party, though. Feels more like the end of a long, bitter chapter. Marcus paused, then asked, You hear about Sabrina? My sources say she packed up and left town, probably to avoid any potential fraud charges or public humiliation. Helen closed her eyes. I don't think I can muster pity for her. She orchestrated a massive con. That said, I hope she finds some better path. Opening her eyes, she gazed at the flickering orange horizon. Charlie's a wreck too, from what I saw. He looks deflated. Marcus's tone softened. People who chase fantasies often end up that way. If you need anything like security measures to ensure nobody tries something desperate, let me know. Helen managed a small smile. Thank you, Marcus. I'm glad to have you in my corner. But I think I'll be okay now. The judge has ruled. Sabrina's gone. There's not much more that can happen. Right? Right, Marcus agreed. Take some time for yourself. You've been living under siege. Maybe find a new hobby. Travel. See friends. You've earned it. After the call ended, Helen stood on the balcony for a long while, listening to the ocean's relentless hum. If she'd learned anything, it was that storms, no matter how violent, do eventually pass. She thought of her father's counsel, when the battle is won, don't forget to live, my dear. She whispered to the fading sky, Yes, Dad, it's time to live. Over the ensuing weeks, Helen made deliberate efforts to reclaim her life. She spent long mornings swimming in the ocean, letting the cool, salt water wash away residual anger. Afternoons were devoted to her clients and to reorganizing the law firm's approach. She planned to focus on pro bono cases for older women who found themselves in desperate financial situations after divorce. She saw it as a way to honor her father's legacy and her own experience. With Charlie no longer contesting the beach house, the final divorce settlement moved swiftly. They divided joint accounts, agreed on distribution of cars and personal items, and arranged to sell the modern high-rise condo they once shared, splitting the proceeds. Helen was surprised at how smoothly it went. Charlie seemed bent on closing the chapter with minimal fuss, perhaps eager to erase the memory of Sabrina's deception. On a sunny afternoon, Helen signed the last of the paperwork in Janet's office. Janet exhaled, meeting Helen's gaze. It's official now. The judge will finalize the decree by mail, but effectively, you're free. She slid a final copy of the settlement across the desk. Congratulations, or condolences, whichever you prefer. Helen managed a wry smile. A bit of both. Maybe. I never envisioned my marriage ending in scandal. But I'm relieved. Janet nodded sympathetically. Divorce is never clean. Still, in terms of property, you came out where you started, plus a world of insight about the man Charlie turned into. Helen tucked the papers into a folder. What about Sabrina? Has there been any sign of her trying to contact Charlie or me? Janet shook her head. None. She seems to have vanished. If she's smart, she won't return, given how easily charges of attempted fraud could be levied against her. Leaving the office, Helen felt lighter. She walked to her car with the final settlement documents, a symbolic sense of closure settling in. Driving the coastal road back to her father's house, she reflected on how everything had changed over the past few months. The betrayal, the confrontation, the legal battles they felt like a storm that had consumed her life. Now the skies were calmer, though the scars remained. Back at the beach house, she stepped out onto the patio. The sun glinted off the ocean, sending spears of light across the waves. She thought about how she had once dreaded returning here because it reminded her of Charlie and what they had lost. But now, the place stood as a testament to her resilience, a safe harbor that no one could take away. For the first time in months, she felt an urge to entertain. She texted Marcus, Janet, and a few close friends, inviting them for a small gathering that weekend. Time to fill these rooms with laughter again, she thought, not the echo of arguments and court battles. She set her phone aside, pressing her palms against the warm stone railing of the patio. Seagulls circled overhead, calling to each other in the open sky. Somewhere deep within, Helen felt a call, too, a call to step beyond the wreckage of her divorce and embrace whatever future she chose. That weekend, the beach house buzzed with a low-key celebration. Marcus arrived first, carrying a crate of craft beer, while Janet followed with a homemade cheesecake. A few other friends trickled in, colleagues from the firm and neighbors who had supported Helen during the ordeal. The sun set in a blaze of pink and orange, casting the ocean in a gentle glow as everyone congregated on the deck. Helen, wearing a casual linen sundress, moved among her guests, exchanging laughs and stories. She felt a twinge of nostalgia for the times she and Charlie had hosted dinner parties here, but it was less painful than before. The space felt renewed, reclaimed. She found Marcus at the patio railing, gazing out toward the horizon, setting her drink on a nearby table. She joined him. "Thanks for all your help," she said softly. "I couldn't have done this without your investigations and your friendship." He turned, offering a slight smile. "You did the heavy lifting." "Helen, I just pulled a few threads and watched the truth come out." Janet wandered over, catching the tail end of their conversation. "It's been quite a ride," she commented, raising her glass. To Helen, proving that even if you're a top divorce attorney, dealing with your own divorce is still a war zone. They clinked glasses. The group behind them laughed over some anecdote, and Helen glanced back to see her living room filled with friendly chatter instead of tension. She let out a contented sigh. I never thought the house could feel so alive again. Even after I won the legal battle, it still felt heavy. But tonight, it's different because you chose to reclaim it, Marcus said simply, tipping his beer bottle toward the interior. You're not just defending it from Charlie, you're opening it to a new chapter. Helen nodded, touched by his words. Then she heard her phone buzz on the kitchen counter. Excusing herself, she threaded through the guests to check the message. When she saw the sender, her stomach knotted Charlie. She debated ignoring it, but curiosity won out. The text read, I'm leaving town next week, moving to Seattle. I'm sorry for everything, Helen. I really am. Take care. Helen stared at the words, her heart twinging. She realized that despite his betrayal, a part of her once loved Charlie deeply. The finality of his departure weighed on her, but also brought relief. She tapped out a short reply. I wish things had been different. Good luck in Seattle. Switching off her phone, she rejoined the festivities. Marcus arched an eyebrow in question, but she shook her head, indicating it was nothing urgent. Instead of letting Charlie's farewell linger, she allowed herself to enjoy the warmth of the gathering. The laughter, the music, the soft glow of string lights strung around the deck, these were the moments she wanted to fill her home with. Later, as guests trickled out and the moon rose high, Helen sat alone on the deck, sipping the last of her wine. The quiet night surrounded her, and the waves hushed against the shoreline. She breathed in the sea air, feeling an expansive freedom, as though the walls around her heart had finally opened to let the future in. With Charlie's move to Seattle looming, the divorce nearing finalization, and Sabrina gone, Helen settled into a peaceful routine, yet life had a way of offering unexpected twists. One morning, she received a large envelope marked confidential from a law firm in Los Angeles. Curious, she opened it to find a short letter. Dear Ms. Morris, we represent a private party who has a potential interest in the property located at 217 Ocean Crest. We kindly request a meeting to discuss. Our client wishes to remain anonymous until initial terms can be established. Regards, Watson and Gray, LLP. Helen's brows knitted. The only property at 217 Ocean Crest was her beach house. Interest in the property. Could it be a developer, or perhaps someone wanting to buy it? She felt a flare of annoyance. It was just secured as hers, and already someone was circling like a vulture. She phoned Janet, who advised her to respond cautiously. Invite them to clarify what they're after, Janet suggested. No need to meet unless we see their client's name. Helen drafted a short reply, reiterating that she was not interested in selling and that her father's trust restricted any transfer. Eorn. Within days, another letter arrived, this time more persistent, emphasizing their client's emotional connection to the property and a desire to discuss a personal matter. Curiosity got the better of her. She arranged a meeting at her firm's conference room, insisted on confidentiality, and sat down with two attorneys from Watson and Gray. Their demeanor was polite but guarded. They revealed little except that their client had ties to Arthur Morris, a claim that made Helen's heart skip. Helen couldn't recall any acquaintances of her father who would want to buy her house. Could it be some distant relative, a forgotten friend? The attorneys politely refused to give the client's identity without a preliminary confidentiality agreement. Recognizing that no harm came from a conversation, Helen signed a narrowly tailored NDA. A week passed with no further communication. Then one day, as she was leaving work, her assistant said, Miss Morris, there's someone in reception asking for you. Says her name is Regina Carlyle. She wouldn't give more details. Helen, perplexed, stepped out to the reception area. A well-dressed older woman with sharp cheekbones and graying hair stood, clutching a small handbag. She glanced at Helen, her eyes flickering with hesitation. Helen Morris. Yes, I'm Regina Carlyle, the woman said carefully. I I knew your father, Arthur, a long time ago, before he moved to this area. Could we talk in private? Helen studied the woman. She looked to be in her mid-60s, elegant but nervous. Something in her demeanor suggested a significant secret. All right, Helen agreed, leading her to a side office. Inside, Helen offered her a seat. How exactly did you know my father? Regina paused, swallowing hard. He and we had a child together. Before he married your mother, that child, well, he recently passed, and he left behind a request that I attempt to reconnect with Arthur's family. Helen's heart pounded, 1,000 questions flooding her mind. She had never heard of any half-sibling. What does this have to do with my house? Regina's voice wavered. He believed your father promised him something, a stake in the property Arthur planned to buy. He wrote letters, thought maybe Arthur would include him in the inheritance. It's complicated. Helen felt as if the floor had dropped beneath her. Another claim on the house, a hidden legacy. She took a steadying breath, bracing for yet another twist in her family story. Helen led Regina Carlyle to a more discreet conference room, summoning Janet for backup. She sensed this matter had the potential to stir up a hornet's nest of old family secrets. Once they were settled, Regina began a carefully paced explanation. I'm not here to fight you over the house, she clarified, voice gentle but earnest. My son, Timothy, passed away a few months ago. He battled a degenerative illness. On his deathbed, he asked me to find Arthur Morris, your father, and tell him that Timothy never forgot his promises. Helen struggled to grasp the implications. My father left no mention of any other child in his will. He was always meticulous about finances. Are you certain Timothy was his son? Regina nodded, producing a folded letter. This is a letter your father wrote me decades ago. He acknowledged Timothy was his, but said he wasn't in a position to provide a public recognition. He did send some money over the years, which helped, but Timothy always felt excluded. Janet leaned forward. Ms. Carlyle, I respect your loss, but Arthur Morris's estate has been settled for years. The beach house was purchased with Helen's inheritance and placed into a trust. There's no documented arrangement for anyone else. Regina placed the letter on the table with trembling fingers. Timothy believed Arthur promised him some part of the property once he became an adult. Arthur never fulfilled that promise, perhaps because of complications with your mother. I'm just honoring my son's final request to see if anything can be done, not for money, but for closure. Helen inhaled, scanning the letter. The handwriting did resemble her father's, dated roughly 35 years ago, referencing regrets and an intention to support Timothy when the time is right. It was ambiguous, nothing legally binding, but it revealed a side of Arthur she'd never known. An emotional ache flickered in Helen's chest. She had idolized her father, seen him as moral and upright, but this letter indicated he kept a secret, another child, hidden from Helen's family. It didn't negate everything he'd done for her, but it cast a new light. He was human, she reminded herself, capable of mistakes and hidden regrets. Janet spoke softly. There's no legal basis to claim the property now. Ambiguum. If Timothy was alive, he might try to open a paternity claim and challenge the estate, but the statute of limitations likely ran out. You said you're not interested in money. Ms. Carlyle Regina sighed, tears brimming. All I want is some acknowledgement of Timothy's existence. He died believing Arthur had abandoned him. I hoped maybe you, as Arthur's daughter, could at least let me see the place he once hoped to share. Perhaps a small corner of the property where I could scatter Timothy's ashes, fulfilling his final wish. Helen felt a lump in her throat. She was torn between protecting her sanctuary and empathizing with the grief of a woman who'd lost her son. She exchanged a glance with Janet, searching for a path that honored her father's memory without endangering her own hard-earned security. "Let me think about it," Helen said gently. "I need time to process this new information." Regina nodded, wiping her tears. "That's all I ask. Thank you." Helen spent the next few days in a storm of reflection, grappling with the revelation of her half-brother Timothy. If she'd learned anything from the divorce battle, it was to face uncomfortable truths head-on. Yet this was different, deeply personal, connected to her father in a way that challenged her idealized image of him. She wandered the corridors of the beach house, recalling the countless conversations with Arthur about moral integrity and honesty. Had he deliberately concealed Timothy's existence to protect his marriage to Helen's mother? Or had he simply been overwhelmed by circumstances? Either way, he'd left behind a painful legacy for Regina and her child. Marcus called to check in, and Helen revealed the shocking news. He listened quietly, then said, "You've been through enough battles lately. Maybe this time, approach it from a place of compassion, not conflict." Helen nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I'm not angry at Regina or Timothy. I just feel disoriented. My father taught me to fight for what's right, but now I see he wasn't always the perfect moral compass I believed. Maybe he was just human." That evening, she stood on the patio as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. A pang of empathy pressed on her heart. Regina had lost her only child. Timothy had died feeling abandoned by the father who never fully claimed him. If scattering his ashes on part of the property could offer closure, was that so great a concession? The memory of her father's voice drifted through her mind. "Protect the house, my dear, but also protect your heart." She wondered if granting Regina's request would tarnish or honor her father's wishes. Finally, she decided that compassion needn't threaten the trust or her ownership. A small act of kindness might serve both families. She contacted Janet to explore the legal ramifications. Yes. Janet assured her that allowing Regina to scatter ashes didn't equate to recognizing any legal claim. They could draft a simple agreement that waived further claims on the property. Thus, Helen invited Regina for a private meeting at the beach house a week later. When Regina arrived, dressed in a subdued black dress, Helen could see the weight of loss etched into her face. The two women stood on the cliff overlooking the restless waves. Helen explained her decision. "My father's final words to me were to make this place my sanctuary. But I believe it can also bring peace to you and Timothy's memory. If you'd like, you can scatter his ashes here on the cliffs." Regina's eyes brimmed with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know Timothy would find solace in this view, in knowing he was at least acknowledged." They proceeded to the cliff edge. The wind whipped Regina's hair as she opened a small urn. In a quiet, emotional moment, she released Timothy's ashes into the coastal breeze. Helen stood by her side, gazing at the fragments drifting into the ocean's vast expanse. A sense of calm washed over her. This was not a betrayal of her father's trust, but a final acknowledgement of his humanity. Regina softly sobbed, and Helen placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. In the distance, the sun broke free of the clouds, illuminating the water with a gentle glow. It felt like a cleansing for both of them, and perhaps, in some mysterious way, for Arthur too. In the days that followed, a new sense of serenity suffused Helen's life. The formal divorce decree arrived in the mail, stamping finality on her marriage to Charlie Vasquez. She tucked it away in a file, feeling surprisingly at peace. The drama with Sabrina was over, Regina's request fulfilled, and the beach house remained hers, unmarred by legal disputes. She gradually redecorated certain rooms, infusing them with her personal style, rather than the half-compromises she'd once made with Charlie. The walls of the master suite gained a warm shade of terracotta, complementing the ocean view. In the living room, she replaced the sterile glass coffee table Charlie had insisted on with a rustic wooden piece that felt more inviting. Bit by bit, the house reflected her own tastes and history, a true sanctuary. One crisp Saturday morning, Helen decided to host a small gathering for close friends and neighbors, an unofficial housewarming to celebrate her reclaiming the space. This time, she invited Regina as well. She wanted to build a bridge between the fragments of Arthur's past and her present circle of support. That afternoon, a gentle breeze wafted through open French doors as music played softly. Friends gathered around the patio, sipping wine or lemonade, munching on hors d'oeuvres, and chatting easily. Janet introduced herself to Regina, and Helen watched them talk about Arthur's younger days with surprising fondness. It warmed her heart to see that even the most unexpected relationships could find harmony. Marcus arrived with a bottle of champagne, giving Helen a quick, knowing smile. She guided him to the new seating area, where guests laughed and shared stories. At some point, she paused to take it all in the clinking glasses, the subdued hum of conversation, and the vast ocean spreading out beneath a mellow sun. This is what it means to be free, she thought. Across the deck. She spotted Regina lingering at the cliff edge, gazing at the spot where she'd scattered Timothy's ashes. Helen approached her gently. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Regina turned, a tearful smile tugging at her lips. "Better, knowing he rests here, in a place Arthur treasured, gives me comfort." She touched Helen's arm lightly. "I'm grateful you allowed this. It helps me forgive the past." Helen smiled back, her own eyes moist. "I think Arthur would approve. Maybe he never got to reconcile with you or Timothy the way he should have, but at least we did something." They stood there a moment, the wind tousling their hair, the ocean breathing in rhythmic waves below. Helen felt a profound sense of closure. She had navigated betrayal, uncovered hidden family, and emerged with a deeper understanding of both her father and herself. The house no longer felt haunted by legal battles or unspoken truths. It was simply home. Sometime later, Marcus caught her eye from across the deck, lifting a glass in salute. Helen raised hers in return, a quiet vow of gratitude for the people who stood by her and for her own courage in guarding this sanctuary through every storm that had threatened it. Early one morning, several weeks later, Helen walked along the shore at low tide. The sand was cool beneath her bare feet, and a faint dawn light tinged the sky pink. She remembered how her father used to bring her to the beach at sunrise when she was a child, telling her it was the best time to find seashells and watch the world wake up. Kneeling at the water's edge, she scooped up a smooth shell. She studied its gentle curves, thinking about how many storms it must have endured, washed ashore yet still intact. "A bit like me," she mused, "resilient despite the tumult." In the months since the divorce, her law practice had flourished, freed from her own crisis. She dedicated more time to mentoring younger attorneys and championing the rights of older clients facing marital issues late in life. She even spearheaded a local workshop on estate planning, ensuring people, especially women, knew how to protect their assets. Every time she shared her knowledge, she felt her father's spirit near, guiding her to empower others. As the sun peeked over the horizon, she made her way back up the cliffside stairs to her home. The sight of the beach house always stirred her heart, its tiled roof catching the morning light, the arched windows glowing amber as the interior lights warmed the kitchen. She entered through the back patio, the salty breeze trailing her inside. After a quick shower, she brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen island. Reviewing her day's schedule, her phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "We're all set for your interview with the local newspaper at 2 p.m. They want to feature you in an article about top family lawyers making a difference." "Congrats," Helen grinned. She typed back, "Thanks for the heads up. Let's show them what we've built." The irony of being a well-regarded divorce lawyer while surviving her own high-stakes divorce was not lost on her, but she embraced it fully. Her experiences had sharpened her skills and given her empathy for clients in ways she never anticipated. Before heading out, she paused at a small shrine she'd set up in the corner of her living room. There, she'd placed a framed photo of Arthur, a simple vase of fresh flowers, and the letter Regina had shared, folded neatly in an envelope, a symbolic gesture of acceptance of her father's complex past. She ran a fingertip across the photo, whispering, "Thank you, Dad, for teaching me resilience, even if it came with lessons you never intended." She left the house with renewed energy, driving toward her downtown office. The day ahead promised more cases, more stories, more lives to impact, and in every conversation, every negotiation, she would carry the memory of her battle, how she nearly lost her sanctuary to lies and greed, yet emerged stronger. As the car merged onto the main road, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The beach house perched atop the cliff, steadfast against the backdrop of sky and sea. She felt a surge of profound gratitude, knowing that no matter what her future held, that house and the woman she'd become stood grounded and unshakable. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Helen found herself hosting one more gathering, this time a more intimate dinner party for only a handful of close confidants. The evening air was balmy, and the horizon was painted with vivid strokes of orange and lavender. Marcus, Janet, and Regina joined her on the patio, small glasses of wine in hand. Soft music from a nearby Bluetooth speaker set a serene atmosphere. Conversation flowed freely, updates on work, lighthearted banter about TV shows, musings on future travel plans. Janet teased Marcus about his reluctance to settle down, while Regina shyly mentioned her plan to volunteer at a local hospice, honoring her late son's memory by comforting others. Eventually, the talk turned to Helen. Marcus raised his glass in a toast to Helen, who not only safeguarded this incredible property from the jaws of a shameless scheme, but also emerged with grace, empathy, and a renewed sense of purpose. Everyone clinked glasses, the warm glow of camaraderie settling over them. Helen smiled, a soft flush coloring her cheeks. "I appreciate the sentiment, Marcus," she replied, setting her glass down. Her gaze drifted across the gentle flicker of string lights and the candlelit table. "It's hard to believe it's been just over a year since Charlie dropped that bombshell at the restaurant. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." Janet nodded sympathetically. "That was a battle none of us will forget. But look where we stand now, the house still in your name, free of disputes, and your life truly yours again." Helen breathed in the salt-tinged air, recalling the chaotic journey, Charlie's betrayal, Sabrina's fake pregnancy, the mounting legal drama, and the quiet heartbreak of discovering her father's hidden past. In the end, she held on to her inheritance and gained a deeper perspective on love, trust, and forgiveness. Regina placed a hand on Helen's arm. "I want to thank you," she said softly, "for allowing me to grieve Timothy here. This place, it feels sacred in its own way. I find peace just visiting him on the cliffs." Helen's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm glad it brings you solace. My father had his flaws, but he loved this land. Maybe that love can bring healing to both our families." As the evening progressed, the group eventually retired to the living room, discussing future plans. Marcus teased Helen about turning her father's house into a community retreat for divorced women, a half-serious idea that made everyone laugh. But Helen actually considered it, recalling how many clients needed a supportive sanctuary after losing theirs. Later, alone in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes, Helen paused to take in the sound of distant surf and the glowing warmth from the fireplace. She felt no lingering anger, no regret, just a gentle acceptance of all that had transpired. I own this house, she thought, and no one else's lies or betrayals can ever take it from me again. Walking to the balcony, she gazed upon the moonlit ocean, whispering a silent promise to herself to fill this home with the love, care, and respect she deserved all along. That vow, more than any legal document, affirmed her ultimate victory, a testament not just to property rights, but to the resilient human spirit that claimed its place in the world and refused to be uprooted by anyone. In the end, every battle has its casualties. Not all wounds bleed, and not all scars are visible. She stood quietly on the terrace, the waves crashing softly against the shore below, carrying away the echoes of betrayal and heartache. The mansion behind her, once a battlefield of silent wars and unspoken truths, now belonged solely to her. But victory had come at a steep price, the cost measured in sleepless nights, buried dreams, and the innocence lost somewhere along the path of necessary cruelty. She had entered the storm as one woman and emerged as another, stronger, wiser, but undeniably changed. The faces of those she'd fought and outmaneuvered lingered in memory, ghosts she would carry as reminders of the thin line between justice and revenge. Yet beneath the satisfaction of reclaiming what was hers, a quiet ache remained, a question of who she had become in pursuit of victory, and whether the price she paid was worth the freedom she'd gained. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bittersweet gold, a gentle breeze whispered softly through the twilight. In the battle to reclaim ourselves, what parts do we lose along the way?